Hello, listeners, and welcome to this episode of EduChats. I am Luis Carlos Bocanegra, and I am joining you from the Rio Grande Valley here in South Texas. Today is Tuesday, October 20th, and today we're going to be discussing a topic on labeling theory and how those labels affect a student's ability to persist. So we can begin with what is labeling theory and how is it attached, for example, to me? So labeling theory says that is how a person identifies with themselves and how that identification has an effect on behavior. So let's take myself, for example. When I was in school, I was labeled as an English learner and economically disadvantaged student. So I would notice how I would get pulled out from class to receive remedial instruction. However, I felt that I could learn at the same pace that my other classmates could. So then I began to notice a difference within the instruction that I was receiving. Now, I didn't know that I was labeled as economically disadvantaged until later on when I learned what economically disadvantaged was. So even though I did not know what these labels were and how they were attached to me, I still wanted to show that I could be a good example to others. I graduated high school. I obtained a bachelor's degree in business administration, a master's degree in educational leadership, and I'm currently working in a doctoral program towards a doctorate in education. So then my question is, if I was labeled and I was able to persist academically, then how is it that this affects other students that might be labeled as well? So we look at our first label, English learners, and we look at the work from Garcia and Borrego. They mention that students continue to underperform when they have an attached label of English learners. They underperform those students that are not labeled as English learners. So then we think about if students are receiving instruction, then what can the educators do to try and assist them so that they can feel better about themselves, thus increasing their willingness to persist? So a study conducted by Hong and his colleagues in 2014 tells us that if a teacher pays attention to a student's language, culture, a different type of pedagogy, as well as a student's community, that student is more likely to receive a better quality instruction, thus them feeling better about themselves, and that engages in more of academic persistence. Looking at the way that teachers impact instruction is very important, but also looking at the way that students can have the ability to be academically stable has a lot to do with the way that their economic background is. When students are labeled as economically disadvantaged, they are already starting with a big hurdle in front of them. So Babcock in 2014 stated that students have a difficulty trying to educate themselves when they're lacking the basic needs to survive. They have to balance whether they're going to pay attention in class or they might have all the worries that they're carrying with them. So Duncan and Mermain brought up a good point, and they mentioned that income inequality plays a big role in the way that students are able to have access to resources. So then that also widens the achievement gap. So then how is it that we want our students to obtain all these types of allegates when it's difficult for them to just try and focus on their schoolwork? And Ladd argues that policymakers are not doing enough for the students. So labels that are attached to students do influence the way that they see themselves. I was able to overcome those labels and I was able to persist. So I call on our educators to continue to work with students who are labeled as economically disadvantaged and English learners as well. I want to thank you very much for joining us for this episode of EduChats. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you join us next time when we discuss college readiness. And I want you to always remember that knowledge is power.